Before we start the countdown, I think I should talk for just a second about the so-called Slave Leia outfit. There's been some controversy about the outfit and about merchandise that's been made for it, and some have gone so far as to say that Disney will never allow another Slave Leia-related product to be made. But in my opinion, some of the criticism that people have for the outfit stems from a misunderstanding of what's going on in the Jabba's palace scenes. I've heard people complain about how Leia's spirit appeared to be broken in these scenes, and how it didn't fit with her otherwise strong and defiant character elsewhere in the films. And some people take issue with how Luke apparently has to swoop in and save her from Jabba. But let's not forget how she got there in the first place. She infiltrated Jabba's palace disguised as a bounty hunter, and managed to best Jabba in a contest of wills, convincing him that she would use her thermal detonator rather than back down. When she and Han ended up getting captured, she knew that she just had to wait for Plan B, otherwise known as Luke. It wouldn't have made any sense for her to fight back against Jabba at this point. Thanks to Ula, we know exactly what would have happened to her if she had done that. So she decided to bide her time, but as soon as she saw an opening, she strangled Jabba with the very chain that he had used to imprison her. This may in fact be the most badass scene for Leia in the entire trilogy, especially when you take into account the fact that she was the one to aim the cannon at the deck, enabling them to blow up the entire sail barge. I think the problem is focusing too much on the slave aspect and not on what she actually accomplished in these scenes. I see the outfit as a symbol of her strength and not something demeaning, so I'm totally behind the move to rename her Huttslayer Leia. With that said, let's take a look at my top 15 Huttslayer Leia collectibles. I certainly wouldn't blame you if you couldn't tell what this vintage item was at first glance. If we look at the bottom, we can see that it was made by Adam Joseph Industries in 1983. It's got a nice graphic of Leia on the front along with the Return of the Jedi logo, but it isn't until we pull off the top that we see that it is actually a pocket comb and mirror set. This is noteworthy for a couple of reasons. First of all, there is almost no merchandise from the vintage era featuring Leia in this outfit, and it also seems likely that they were at least partially targeting girls with this, which is rather unusual for Star Wars merchandise even today. It's a cool little item, especially the spring-loaded action when you remove the comb. Next up we have a pair of itty-bitty plushes from Hallmark. Now these were released as a pair, and in fact they're still connected together. That's why I'm including Jabba here. They were released in 2016 as a comic convention exclusive, so they were originally sold at San Diego Comic-Con. And I have to say they're really well done. All the embroidery and everything, the design work, is surprisingly well done for a plush like this. Which is good because I think this is the only plush made of Leia in this outfit. Hasbro had a very large line of 12-inch scale figures in the late 90s, and to be honest, I was never a fan of them. While some of them, like the droids, are okay, most of them seem too close to Barbie dolls for my taste, and I guess you could say they cranked that dial up to 11 for this figure, which literally looks like it could be called Barbie as Jabba's prisoner. But if you can get past that part, it's actually a surprisingly well done figure. They did also release a slightly different version of this figure in a box on her own, but this version with R2-D2 included is definitely the one I prefer. The box is really elaborate with multiple layers of pop-up cardboard on the left here, and also a multiple layer background. And the figures are also fairly well displayed, so you don't necessarily have to take them out of the box to be able to see them well. I think there's a bit of a resemblance to Carrie Fisher in this sculpt, although you may have to squint a little bit to see it. It's certainly better than the original version that they had planned for this figure, I'll give it that. And I'll have to say the outfit itself is also really nicely detailed. This cloth is pretty cool, even though I don't think these patterns were actually on the screen-used costume, they are kind of attractive. So while this isn't exactly the kind of thing I generally like to collect, I have come to appreciate it, as Jabba said. As a LEGO fan, I couldn't ignore the LEGO minifigures that have been released. The first one is the original with the yellow skin, and then the second was simply that with recolored, more natural skin. But my favorite is this one here, for several reasons. It's got the best paint and a much more detailed headpiece there for her hair. And also, if you take off the hair, you can see that they have a different expression on the back of her head, which seems appropriate since you don't want her necessarily smiling or angry in every situation. This vinyl statue was released by the Japanese company Kotobukiya, but I modified mine years ago to use it with a larger Jabba's Palace display, and I don't have the original version anymore, which is what you see here. Basically, I replaced the vinyl skirt with one made out of cloth taken from the Hasbro figure, and then I also gave her a little pillow to sit on, otherwise she'd sort of be hovering above the base. It's an interesting piece, though, because it's done in what I would call an anime or Japanese animation style, which is pretty distinctive and unique. One bit of trivia is that she was originally sold dismembered like this because Kotobukiya only had the license to sell model kits and not statues. But in reality, assembling it only takes a few seconds. This next entry is from Gentle Giant's very popular line of mini-busts. They've made a huge number of Star Wars mini-busts over the years, with more than a dozen just for Jabba's Palace characters. I think the sculpting here is actually pretty solid, but as is often the case, the paint could be better and it makes the likeness to Carrie Fisher suffer a little bit. Still, it's nice to have her in the lineup, even if this isn't the best standalone piece. Things like the vibro axe are quite detailed, and she has real metal chain and earrings. When it comes to 3 3/4-inch action figures, there have been 3 main versions created, including this gigantic one on the left, which is the Power of the Force 2 version. And, they've been re-released as well over the years in various different packages and so forth. But if you ask me, this is the clearly superior one. If you look at the face, there's a little bit of Carrie Fisher in there, I suppose, and it's not an unattractive sculpt or paint job. But more importantly, it also includes a lot of articulation that's not present in the other figures, which can be important when you're trying to pose her in front of Jabba, for example. But this figure actually has one more secret feature. That's right, you can split her at the waist and add a pair of sitting legs on top of a pillow, which allow you to naturally display her in front of Jabba, which has never really been possible with other figures. In fact, the other ones didn't even have bendable knees. So I think this is definitely the one to get. However, you should be aware that only the original Legacy Collection release had the sitting legs included. They did re-release this in various packages, such as the Vintage Collection packaging, without the legs included. This 6-inch figure from Hasbro's Black Series isn't perfect, but if you look at the face, you can see a real resemblance to Carrie Fisher that is completely lacking in all of the other action figure versions that have been made. True, the paint could use a little improvement, but that's pretty much always true with Hasbro figures. The outfit could use a little improvement as well, because the cloth that they've chosen for her skirt tends to be frayed, as you can see here on the edges, which doesn't look great. And the exposed joints are a little bit ugly, but I think that's probably unavoidable in the case of a figure like this one. It does, however, allow her to pose in lots of different poses, including one in front of Jabba here, which I think is probably the most important one for most people's collections. So it's relatively easy to get her to display here in front of Jabba without even having the necessity for another pair of legs like the one I just showed you. This next item was part of Hasbro's line of Unleashed figures. Well, they were plastic statues, really, but many of them were in very dynamic and often exaggerated poses. This one, though, is a bit more elegant and reserved. The face is definitely stylized and looks almost like it could be from a Japanese cartoon, but it looks really good, I think. I also like how they've used one end of the sail barge as the base for the figure. This is definitely still a mass-market figure and not a proper statue, so the paint could be better, and you can even see mold lines in places, but overall I think it's really well done. This is a pewter statue made by Royal Selangor in Malaysia as part of their line of Star Wars statues. It's made of solid pewter on what appears to be a wooden base, and it's extremely heavy for its size. As you can see, it's also very reflective, which can make it look a little strange depending on your viewing angle, but in person, it's very impressive looking. I'd say the sculpt is quite good overall, and there's definitely a resemblance to Carrie Fisher, although it does lose a bit in close-ups like this. These figures are quite expensive, but they do have a suitably high-end feel. People have been saying since 2015 that Disney wasn't going to allow any more so-called Slave Leia merchandise to be made, although this was released a year or two after that, and it's still available in some places today. In fact, you can still buy it on the Disney Online store right now. That said, I don't know of any new merchandise for Leia in this outfit in the pipeline, so it is conceivable that this could turn out to be the last item made for this version of the character. The French company Attakus has released a large number of cold-cast porcelain statues starting in the early 2000s. They don't generally try for absolute realism or exact likenesses of the actors involved, and this is no exception. I don't really think this looks that much like Carrie Fisher, but they are kind of appealing to me, nonetheless. I actually bought mine in Japan, and it was missing the tip of her braid here, and that's one reason why I was able to get this for way less than the actual retail price. One interesting fact about this is you can remove it from the base, as you see here, and place it on the base of the large Jabba statue that Attakus released. And that's how I have mine displayed. Next up, we have this animated maquette from Gentle Giant. This was part of a very extensive line of statues released in the early to late 2000s that portrayed Star Wars figures using an animated style. I think this one does a pretty good job of capturing Leia's spirit. These pieces were notoriously fragile, though, with many people receiving theirs broken. I myself bought this one for almost nothing on eBay back then because one of the arms and one of her fingers had broken off, but it was a relatively easy fix and you can't even really tell now. Unfortunately, they never released any more Jabba-related characters. I would have loved to have seen what they could have done with Jabba himself. This statue was released by Gentle Giant in 2007, but I think many people today would count this as their favorite Huttslayer Leia collectible. It is very well sculpted, with realistic-looking cloth and incorporating some metal parts such as her chain and earrings. I do think the paint could be improved a bit, but the likeness to Carrie Fisher is certainly better than on most statues. However, I've always thought that this pose made her look a bit too sultry, and there's no question that this statue is a lot more buxom than Carrie Fisher actually was in this outfit. I actually have another one of these that has been removed from its base so that it can be used in conjunction with the Sideshow Collectibles 1/6 scale Jabba the Hutt display. I first used it with the old version you see here, and later with the updated version. The only 1/6 scale figure of Leia in this outfit that has been officially released is the one from Hasbro that I mentioned earlier in the video, and its Barbie doll-like aesthetic really doesn't match the Sideshow setup, so I'm very glad to have this statue. I bought it from eBay from someone who tried to remove the statue from the base and partially broke it in the process, and it broke even further while in the mail to me, requiring some extensive restoration work, including resculpting a finger from scratch and also fixing some of the cloth parts that had broken off. As you can see, it's not perfect. You can still see a bit of roughness on her hand there, but it's definitely not noticeable when she's on the throne, and I'm glad I was able to at least partially repair it. But I definitely wouldn't recommend that anyone try and remove it from the base because there's a very good chance you're going to break it, and quite frankly, it looks better on the base than off. Our penultimate entry is this statue from Sideshow Collectibles called You're Going to Regret This. Released in 2010, it of course portrays the scene where Leia strangles Jabba with her chain, and I really like how dynamic this pose is compared to so many statues of Leia that just have her sitting or lying there, and of course the fact that it includes a full-size Jabba is a big plus in my book. The sculpts on both Jabba and Leia are fantastic, and the paintwork is pretty good as well. Leia's face may look a little odd if you look at it close up like this, but keep in mind that she's really pretty small compared to the rest of the piece. This is the Sideshow exclusive version, which includes a small Salacious Crumb figure as an extra. It's not the best Crumb ever, but it's not bad, and it does fill a space on the base that would otherwise be empty. I'm sure you can probably see why this is one of my all-time favorite Huttslayer Leia collectibles, especially because it's the only one that really shows her actually slaying a Hutt. Finally, at number 1, we have the Sideshow Collectibles Slave Leia Premium Format Figure. Premium format figures are 1/4 scale figures that are mixed media, so they're not just fully sculpted. They include things like cloth and metal. Maybe a little hard to tell how big this is, so here is a 3 3/4 inch figure to compare it to. She's roughly 16 inches tall from the bottom of the base to the top of her head, and especially compared to a lot of the other collectibles that I've shown in this video, she has a very imposing presence just because of that size. It's always possible to improve the paint job on these things, and some people have complained that her eyes look too big, but if you ask me, this has the best likeness to Carrie Fisher I've seen on any collectible. As I said, premium format figures are supposed to combine different kinds of media. So for a Jedi, for example, you'd have cloth robes. In this case, it might have been nice if they could have incorporated, say, a real metal bikini and actual boots. However, those items are just sculpted and painted. They did, however, use actual cloth for the skirt, as you can see, and there's a wire that goes along the edge allowing you to pose it. And they also used real metal for the chain and earrings. As with the previous piece from Sideshow that I just showed you, I'm glad that they went with more of an active pose here, and they also have a determined expression on her face as opposed to just a passive one or maybe a sad one. This definitely seems to capture what I think of as Leia from these scenes in the movie. This is the Sideshow exclusive version of the figure, which means it comes with this 1/4 scale Salacious Crumb figure as just a totally separate bonus, which is definitely the best bonus for getting an exclusive version of a figure that I've ever seen. It's quite well done, I think, although I do think the paint could probably be improved a bit. Well, I hope you enjoyed my top 15 Huttslayer Leia collectibles. Obviously, this is entirely subjective, and to be honest with you, I rearranged things many times over the course of doing this video and also expanded it from top 10 to top 15 because I couldn't decide. I was originally going to include some of the worst collectibles as well, but this video ended up being longer than I had anticipated, and I also had trouble finding a few of the things that I wanted to include, so I'm going to put that off for a little bit and make that a future video, hopefully in the somewhat near future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.